I see a lot of people criticizing stand-up comedians for things that they don't agree with that the stand-up comedians say. And I think sometimes we have to zoom out and say that actually that's not what the art form is for. Like, the art form was never intended to be where we get our ideologies from. Like, I never watch a stand-up comedian and go, that's what I've been missing in my life.
Welcome to Keep It, Cricket Media's show about pop culture and politics and what happens when they smack into each other at an alarming speed. I'm your host, Ira Madison III, I'm a television writer and Fall Out Boy fan.
I'm Louis Fertel, I'm a TV writer and Jane Fonda historian.
Let's get into it. So our guest today is a fantastic writer, actor, comedian, probably the most famous somnambulist we've had on the show. You know him from his stand-up specials, Orange is the New Black, his movie Don't Think Twice, and now you can catch him from now until January 15th on Broadway with his show, The Old Man and the Pool. Welcome to the show, Mike Birbiglia.
Thanks, Ira. That most famous somnambulist that's got to be that's like a subtweet right there. How many famous sleepwalkers are there?
I was just going to ask. I've not been to that Wikipedia, and now I'd be curious.
I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm in the DSM as the example for my sleepwalking disorder, REM sleep behavior disorder.
That's a level of recognition most celebrities will never get. I actually think that's somewhat flattering.
No, who's in the DSM? I mean, come on. What comedians? What comedians and playwrights are in the DSM?
Yeah, it's like you and Freud. Good for you.
A quick search says that other celebrities with who have experienced sleepwalking are Jennifer Aniston.
Oh, there you go.
But no, the other people on here have like sleep apnea or narcolepsy. So I think you got Jennifer Aniston.
That's huge. And we should discuss at some point because she did start following me on Instagram when I hosted Jimmy Kimmel Live because she watches every night when I filled in when he had COVID. That's the inner circle of Hollywood right there. When you guest host Jimmy Kimmel Live, Jennifer Aniston follows you on Instagram. That's the T right there.
I would love then like a Frost Nixon between you both about sleepwalking. Because I'm very intrigued as to like what sleepwalking was like for Jennifer Aniston, and was it like during the height of Friends?
By the way, I'm all over this because that's what I would, because I was like, oh, that would be fun for Jennifer Aniston to come on my podcast working it out, but what would we talk about? And now I know what we're talking about. We're just gonna tell sleepwalking stories for an hour. I think that's a phenomenal idea.
Now, you're joking now, and you've famously talked about sleepwalking before, but something to me that is so interesting about you is your act keeps evolving, and the ways in which we get to know you expand and expand. Do you find yourself surprised at some of the things you are talking about nowadays? Could you have anticipated some of the topics you cover years ago as a comic?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, that is one of the things that, like, as a writer, people always go, are you always writing everything down? When someone is dying in your family, are you thinking, oh, this will be a good piece of writing, that kind of thing? I'll take it a step further. Not only am I always thinking about writing, but then the other end of that is when I'm on stage talking about these things, I sometimes have the thought, I can't believe I'm saying this to a group of 1,000 people. Like, it's so weird. And so with this show, it's particularly that because it's sort of mining into my subconscious of like my deepest fears of death and disease and people out close to me dying and all this stuff. And sometimes I am on stage thinking like, there's no going back. I mean, we're here. And, but it's also like, in that sense, it's also satisfying because I have a lot of people say to me like, this was a conversation starter with me and my son or me and my mom or whatever about things that are deep because I think like one of the things I'm sure drives you both nuts the way it drives me nuts is like I'm really short fused for like small talk. Like I'm just like I get like a minute into a conversation and if it doesn't go somewhere that's substantive, I'm kind of like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
So if I can encourage that in any way, I want to be a part of it.
One thing I really enjoyed about the show was just, first of all, I want to admit that I was one of the people who was part of the brought in 10 minutes into the show.
Oh my gosh, yeah, you were a late person, yeah.
Yes, because the show starts at 7:30, and 7:30 start shows in Broadway are sort of like an anomaly. And
Right.
I thought it was at 8. But I come in with like 40 people, I feel like.
Oh, yeah,
but I
yeah.
love that you made that a part of the show, too.
I always talk about late people. I always talk about if there's any, someone has an absurd laugh, if someone has a particularly strange reaction to some story, some kind of specialized specialty cringe sound they make when I talk about surgeries or something like that. I always think, because I think of theater as like, it's like we're all here. It's a we're all here experience. And I feel like if you don't acknowledge the things that are happening that are anomalous, then like it a little bit breaks the we're all here of it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I like to talk about when people come in late. And also, you know what's funny about that? And this is a little bit of a spoiler alert. If maybe people skip ahead 30 seconds if they're coming to see the show. So it's like half the time people are late, and I'll just do like a recap of what they've missed. But actually, it's good for people who are kind of half paying attention. And they're like, oh yeah, that is what happened so far.
I didn't miss anything. They get to kind of feel smart.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm intrigued, too, by that sense of, sort of we're all here and engaging with people who have different things that might affect the show. Because does that make the show sort of feel more alive for you and like you're doing stand-up almost every night instead of I'm memorizing a one-man show and it's going to be the same thing every night, and I feel like that would be a little bit monotonous for someone like you, as opposed to Audra McDonald doing her,
Right.
one-woman thing all night for Ohio State Murders.
Right. No, I think like it's the what's different every night, and it's true probably for Audra too. I would be curious to ask her about it. Is the audience is different always, and the audience when you do solo work, the audience is your scene partner, and you actually do not know how they're going to react, and I think that it does impact sort of what the evening feels like. I've had people come. My friend Victoria came last night for the third time, and she had like thoughts and notes on like specific moments being different than they were the other 2 times she saw it and all that kind of stuff. And honestly, like I love that. Like I love I think some people hate feedback, like artists hate feedback. Some people do, some people love it. I love it because I feel like it's to keep in the theme of the show. Keep it or throw it away. You can choose. When you get feedback, you can choose whether or not that's something that is helpful for your vision or it's not. And so I sort of love that. And I do feel like every night is different.
Another thing I love about you is I read a Q&A where you specifically said a thing you cherish about other comics is that you don't relate to them. They're coming from a place that isn't like you. And that seems in a way elementary, but to me that's so important. Like in a way, I feel like if somebody asks me what like my favorite album is, I have to say, and here are the reasons I related to the fucking thing. And it's just not true. Like I wish more people just liked something because it didn't remind them of themselves at all. And I was wondering what comics in general feel like that to you.
Like the 2 that I always say, because I'm in awe of their craft and their writing, is Maria Bamford and Doug Stanhope. And whenever I say Maria Bamford, I think people get where that comes from. Doug Stanhope, I think a lot of times people will go like, really? Like Doug Stanhope, that's the person who you're drawn to? Because he's such a provocateur. Like to the point where like one time Jenny and I saw him live and he brings the audience to like less than 0. in terms of like almost hating the show. And it's very Andy Kaufman-esque. Like and then he brings it up, and to an 11. And I love watching that. And he does it. It's all, I haven't talked to him about it at length, but I think it's all by design. And other than that, it's like, all I would say about stand-up comedy at this moment is that I see a lot of people criticizing stand-up comedians for things that they don't agree with that the stand-up comedians say. And I think sometimes we have to zoom out and say that actually that's not what the art form is for. Like, the art form was never intended to be where we get our ideologies from. Like, I never watch a stand-up comedian and go, that's what I've been missing in my life. I like it when people have, can I curse?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
People have fucking wild takes. And you're like, oh, wow, that person like went there on that. And I don't know. I love that. But apparently the way that culture is right now, and with, of course, the exponentialization of everyone's opinion, that the noise of people's opinions about stand-up comedy sometimes makes it seem like that comedian is making like an ideological point, but I'm not so sure they are.
Mm-hmm.
I do feel like part of the appeal of comedy secretly for certain people, though, is a sense of authority. Even like impermeability to a certain extent. Like, oh, you're invulnerable, and we trust this person on stage. But there's something, maybe a little egomaniacal about that. Do you find yourself analyzing the intentions of comedians as you're watching them?
I really don't. Like, I think another example from is of course like Stern. Like, Howard Stern is not a comedian, but he's a radio personality. And I don't actually take what he says at face value. I don't know if other people do. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I sort of listen to it as like, oh, that's a swing. You know what I mean? That's a big swing. I don't know. That's how I see it.
I think there's this sort of, nebulous idea about whether or not someone is, I guess, doing, for lack of better terms, like a bit, or like really committing to it, because there's also this idea that, I grew up watching, like Kings of Comedy, like black stand-up and stuff like that, and seeing as much as they like would really commit to like this sort of personality on stage, like Bernie Mac, for instance, when he's doing
perfect
stand-up.
example.
Completely different Bernie Mac when you see interviews with him, when you watch like the Bernie Mac show, it's like there's multitudes to him. And if you just sort of sit there and take it all as at face value, this is who Bernie Mac is when he's doing a stand-up, then you wouldn't really know who he is. And I feel like maybe at a younger age, I got this idea that just sort of like, he's just performing for, his people. He's performing for the cookout, whatever. And like after that, you move on and you become who you actually are.
Yeah. I mean, Bernie Mac, I think, is a great example. He's like one of the great stand-ups of all time. And it's like, I want to say, like, is it a stammer or stutter character that he does consistently? Mm-hmm. And it's like if you were going to analyze that and say, does he have hatred for people who have a stutter or stammer? Like I don't think so. I mean, I don't know, but my inclination would be no.
Mm.
My inclination, based on everything I've heard about Bernie Mac personally, I don't know him personally, but from Larry Wilmore and other folks who have, is like that he was a really sweet person and really well intended. And I don't know. It's tricky. It's tricky stuff because it's also like the people who are the lightning rods for criticism in stand-up comedy right now. Also, like they seem to kind of relish it too. Mm-hmm. I always say whenever people are provoked by stand-up, it's like, I think you're doing what the person that you can't stand wants you to do, which is be provoked.
Something else you said about where your material comes from is that you journal often, and I forget what percentage of your journaling you said turned into productive material for you, but it was something like 3%. And my question is,
yeah, not exact science, but sure, yeah.
Is that like a frustrating procedure to be like, I'm sitting down to write, and almost certainly this isn't going anywhere, at least professionally?
No, I think it's honestly, that part of the process is therapeutic, because it's and I always say this to people: if you can't afford therapy, get a journal, because I think that journaling, I say in the show, I go in The Old Man in the Pool, I say, I find that if you write in a journal the things that you're sad about or angriest about, you can start to see your own life as a story. And when you see your own life as a story, sometimes you can zoom out and encourage the main character to make better decisions. And I find that journaling for me is precisely that. It's this experience of putting things down on the page, and you start to go, oh my God, like, I can't believe I was upset about that 3 weeks ago. Like, when I read back, even as recent as a week ago, I go, oh wow, I'm really not seeing the forest for the trees here. And it's real, for me, it's really helpful.
Does that mean you read back your journals too?
I do.
All the time, yeah.
I do quite a bit, yeah.
Revisiting the person you were like 3 weeks ago. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One thing I find interesting about that too is just this sort of idea that, as writers and creators, you're constantly reliving things that have happened in your life. Yes, but particularly for stand-ups or someone doing a one-man show like this, you're reliving it constantly, even more so than, someone is reliving a moment that they write into a film or something, and how do you decide how to craft just a moment in time from your life that to make it sort of relevant to what you're going through now? I feel like you do this very well in this show. Alex Edelman did this really well in his show. It just seems to be this sort of special skill to find this moment, like something you might have journaled about, and then be like, okay, I'm going to relate these specific moments to, I guess, the theme of the show.
I think a lot, like as a storyteller, I think what you're trying to ultimately do is, if you have the goal of all of my shows, Sleepwalk with Me, My Girlfriend's Boyfriend, Thank God for Jokes, the new one, and The Old Man in the Pool, is to take a series of stories and turn them into a single story, so that you ultimately don't feel the seams too much between the stories. And I find that, and this is true, like, even if you look at, like, if I look at my favorite movies, and my favorite plays, is you want the causality of the story to have inertia into the next story, and the inertia of that to go into the next story, so that when you arrive at the end, you feel like you've really been on a journey with the person on stage and with the audience. And so a lot of the, and I'm touring the country. I mean, I've been touring, so it's crazy. I've been touring as a comedian for 20 years. And a lot of what I do when I'm touring is I'm putting essentially drafts of these solo plays on stage, and I'm seeing, like, is that inertia that I'm talking about, does it exist? Or am I getting too in the weeds of a tangent or like a bit in the I'm so caught up in the minutia of something that I'm losing sight of the fact that, like, no, this is a story about how a few years ago I went to the doctor, I failed the pulmonary test, then I realized I had diabetes, then it flashed me back to when I had cancer, then it flashed me back to trying to get fit when I was play sports when I was in high school, and then it flashed me back to this, and now I've arrived at this moment where I'm trying to get healthier. I'm trying to, and if any of my stories or bits or jokes don't serve the purpose of going there, I try to just sort of get rid of them. And so a lot of times what'll happen is, like, I'll tour with something and people will go, like, they'll see the final version. They'll go, "What happened to that joke? I love that joke about peanut M&Ms in the minibar at hotels." I used to do this joke, like, early in the process. I had this joke that I actually love, which is like, if you suck on a peanut M&M long enough, it's just a peanut. And if you suck on that peanut long enough, you can taste pure shame. And at a certain point, the shame starts to turn into pride, and you think, "Well, I've been meaning to eat more nuts. Nuts are pretty healthy. They got protein, and people used to really like quote that to me a lot, like, "Oh yeah, I love peanut M&Ms," and then ultimately it was like this thing where it was like to speak to Ira's point about like what stays in the show and what doesn't. The peanut M&Ms bit used to be in the part of the show where I talk about how I get the news that I have type 2 diabetes at a hotel room. And it was one of these things where I talk about how I'm ordering a pizza and I'm eating peanut M&Ms, blah, blah, blah. And then long term, I was like, well, eating the pizza is actually bad enough for the story beat of being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in a hotel room. And so then it just goes away. And then honestly, like, the peanut M&Ms joke might end up in my next show. I don't know. It's all, you can see behind me my cork board from working it out, but it's like it all ends up on the board somewhere, and it ends up somewhere.
You basically mentioned this in some form before, but you take in other comics a lot. You care about what other comics are doing. What kind of pop culture do you watch, go back to that would surprise us, that maybe doesn't relate to what you do necessarily on stage?
I mean, I love SNL. It was so funny because this weekend I was so psyched because I love the Please Don't Destroy fellas on SNL right now. Mm-hmm. They make those Please Don't Destroy the sketches. Shorts, yeah. Mm-hmm. And in the back of the scene this past weekend, there was a Working It Out podcast like postcard that was on the bulletin board, like through the sketch, and all these people Instagram screenshotted it and sent it to me. And so yeah, I love SNL. I think the reason I love SNL is it actually harkens to this thing that Seth Meyers once said about SNL, which is a lot of people like criticize SNL. They go like, it's not good anymore. It's not this, it's not that, and it doesn't fulfill their expectations of what they want. But it's like, what I love about it is it's on every week. And Seth Meyers says this thing where he goes like, some sketches, one thing is always true. Some sketches are good, some sketches are bad, some sketches are okay. And if you accept that as a concept, the show is pretty fun. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't have the expectation of like everything is gonna crush, you're kind of like, yeah, this one's not for me. But like, whatever. I really liked Weekend Update.
I was thinking about that in terms of in the weeds of like some Twitter comment where someone talked about asked if someone was sharing like a clip from like Scandal or something, and they were like, oh, this seems like a really interesting episode, but I quit watching after I hated this one particular episode, which is so weird to me in the age of binging, because when I think about television, and particularly as a writer now, the entire concept of TV used to be, if you watch this one episode, maybe this one sucks, but next week it's going to be a good episode of TV. Yes.
No, it's weird. Like, and also it's funny you should say the thing about like, I didn't like this episode or whatever. I actually think this goes back to the thing we're talking about, stand-up comedy. You don't have to like the comedian or like the comedian's views to enjoy what they're doing as an art form. And I feel like that's true in movies and TV also. It's like I'm more interested by Succession, which has, a lot of people go, I don't like any of the characters on that show. And I'm like, yeah, it's fun. It's fun because it's so wild. Like, it's like, you talk about wild takes. That show is like 13 wild takes simultaneously. Like, there's no one I agree with on that show. Like, I don't think there's a voice of reason character on that show even.
No,
I was going to say that my mom is particularly obsessed with likability of characters. Like, she'll leave a movie and be like, I didn't like anybody in that movie. And I just want to say, like, even on shows that are beloved and age old, like on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, maybe Mary was the only quote unquote normal person ultimately. Like, you don't need 9 of them on any show.
No, and Seinfeld was that. Seinfeld was the character that was the status quo, actually was the comedian.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then you remember the end of Seinfeld when you confronted the audience with the fact that everyone was sort of awful, which everyone else watching it already knew, people famously got mad at, like the four of them being like put to task for the awful shit they've done, but we know they're awful people.
Yeah. Wait, there was one other thing on that though. Succession has that. Oh, you know what else has that? And I love it. You're asking like what I like that's maybe unexpected. First of all, I just like a lot of drama. Like my favorite like quote unquote comedies, a lot of them are like James L. Brooks movies that aren't some of them not considered comedies. Broadcast news, Terms of Endearment. Like to me, those things like really make me laugh. Like another one is like Noah Baumbach movies. Noah Baumbach is an interesting artist because a lot of his movies people perceive as just like hard dramas, with some comedy in them. But the way, I've heard him say in interviews, like he views all of his movies as comedies. And I totally get that. And I think James L. Brooks is the same way. I asked James L. Brooks about that once because I saw him at something and I was like, I always say to people like Terms of Endearment's one of my favorite comedies. And people think I'm joking, but because it's a tearjerker. There's cancer and death and all these things that are sad, but it's actually so funny. And then honestly, the hardest I laugh is like rewatching like Frances Ha or like Squid and the Whale. Squid and the Whale is like, my wife and I quote that movie constantly.
It's a great movie and one of a kind.
Well, there's the Jeff Daniels character has so many great lines where he's so unaware of himself. And he talks about the neighborhood that they live in being the fillet of the neighborhood, or like the part of the neighborhood being the fillet of, and Jen and I, my wife and I quote that all the time because we just think that the fillet of the neighborhood is just such a cringy like way to describe something.
No, but like, you're at the funniest moment of like Terms of Endearment is when, Shirley MacLaine is screaming during this incredibly tense climactic moment. It reminds me of something Amy Mann once said. She said the best serious material is truly lighthearted. Like it gets to the heart of it when it gets funny,
I mean, Chekhov is funny.
You're right.
For sure. 100%. And by the way, and Godot, Waiting for Godot is that too. It's both. It's both, and it's very sad, very funny. I actually think that when dramas go wrong is when there's no humor. Because to me, it doesn't feel like life. It doesn't feel like anything I've ever witnessed in the world, which sort of goes back to my show, The Old Man in the Pool, which is, let's say, like, it's the idea of, like, can you take something that's fundamentally so sad? I remember going to, like, one of our best friends in the show, and they talk about going to one of my best friends' funerals when I was younger, and everyone just crying and then getting drunk and like all this stuff, and it's like trying to find the humor in that. If you can do that, it gives the audience sort of a roadmap to where they can find humor in their own tragedies and sadness, I think.
Yeah, I mean, famously, Mary Tyler Moore with Chuckles, and also
yes.
A classic, Dawson's Creek, when I forget her name, but the bitch in school when she died, and then Michelle Williams has to give a eulogy for her, and she starts cracking up, and she's like, "You all hated her. She was a bitch."
Yes.
And I'm like, that as a kid taught me, like, yeah, you can laugh when some people die.
That's nice. That's a great example. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that the show is really fantastic, and I feel like it is a show that you can see over and over again. When I was there getting my tickets too, this woman who recognized me, she was like, "Oh, this is my like fourth time seeing this show."
Oh my gosh!
So it's really just a fantastic sort of representation of life and death. And I was moved, and the ending, I'm not ruining anything for anyone, but the ending is truly fantastic. The last sort of bit at the end was one of my favorite things that I've seen on stage in quite some time.
Oh, well, thanks a lot, Ira. And I will tip of the cap to just Lincoln Center being just spectacular to visit, especially this time of year.
Lincoln Center is gorgeous.
Holy cow! I mean, between the fountain and the lights, and you got the Nutcracker and the Met and all this, it's just like sometimes with New York City, we forget that we live in the city that has like Lincoln Center, and the Museum of Natural History, and and 30 Rock, and all these places. And it's like it's a knockout city. It's a great city.
Yeah,
and I feel very lucky to sort of be in one of the neat places, for 5 more weeks.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, Mike.
Thanks, Ira. It means the world that you came to the show and you made it. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.